Hi everybody, kia ora koutou, welcome. I'm Janice Mackay, your host, and I am the Welcoming Communities Advisor for Ashburton District Council. I warmly welcome you along with our panellists today. Tony McNeil, Relationship Manager from Immigration New Zealand, and Bevan Rickaby, Economic Development Manager from Ashburton District Council. Today, Tony will share information and advice for migrant workers and their employers. And Bevan will be asking your questions on behalf of you. Together, they will discuss what the immigration picture in New Zealand looks like currently, bearing in mind that things are complex and changing every week. In regards to questions, we have had a lot of questions that came through prior to the webinar, so we will try to cover those off early. For questions that you have during the live webinar, please send your questions to Bevan using the Q&A box and not the chat box, and that helps us keep track of your questions more easily. Please bear in mind also that even though your questions might be specifically related to you, the answers may come back a little bit general to help answer the question for more people. Key contacts and government resources will be made available in a follow-up email to attendees. All right, there's 100 of you on this webinar, so thank you very much for tuning in. And I will now hand it over to Tony and Bevan.
Thank you so much, Janice. Thank you for that welcome, and hi, Bevan. Hello, everybody. And what I thought I'd do was just give you a quick overview of where things stand in an immigration perspective from the last time we spoke. And there'll be some stuff that I'll cover again, but some new stuff as well. Once again, the policy or the legislation that I talk about today is at this point of time. So it's how it is today, and it could change tomorrow. As Janice mentioned, things are very, very fluid, and policy is working very, very quickly to address concerns and issues as they appear. So our border closures is still the same. Only essential people can get in. Most New Zealanders can get in, but if you're looking for an essential worker to come through, it has to be a very high threshold. So some people who in the farming area may have staff still offshore, very difficult to get them back at this point. It's very much a health issue and a governmental issue as to when the border will be opened. One of the realities is that we can only quarantine New Zealand citizens, residents or permanent residents coming back into the country. And that's about 200 a day. So you can see it's quite resource hungry. So, and one of the reasons that New Zealand has successfully flattened the curve is because we took those really strict border rules. So on the 2nd of April, of course, visas got rolled out to the 25th of September if your visa expired before or on the 9th of July. From the 10th of July onwards, if your visa is expiring, you have to apply for a new visa. That is having a new job offer or working out what your legal status will be if you can't get a job, which may be transitioning onto a visitor's visa. But we can talk about that much more later on. So immigration's about 80 to 90% back into the office onshore. Our offshore offices are still closed for health and safety reasons. So now we're able to do many more visas. Essential skills visas can be applied for. We have been prioritising the type of visa way we have been doing, but now we have the ability to receive online applications as our preference. Once again, no compliance activity is being undertaken. So we're completely aware that some migrant workers on temporary visa have lost their jobs. So by virtue of that, they're breaching their current visa. We understand that, but we're not undertaking compliance activity. We want you to reach out to get assistance from your community, from civil defence or your embassy or your consulate. Once again, our website is that source of truth, and any updates can be seen there, and there's been interpreting services in different languages available. One of the big questions that's coming up from the community and from employers is, okay then, so in July, end of July, I have a migrant worker on a temporary visa that I want to keep. I want to offer them a new visa. And that's completely okay, it's fine. The only difference may be is your labour market tests, your skills match reports that you need from MSD. They're going to be required as they always have been. But the landscape and the job opportunities could be, I guess, squeezed for migrant workers, because you may have migrant workers and Kiwi workers standing side by side who are unemployed. And it's always been Kiwi first. We've always had that rationale and that policy as part of employment in New Zealand. So where we were last year to this year is a totally different landscape. It's a totally different environment. So one of the challenges will be, can I continue to sponsor my migrant worker when there are Kiwis available? And that creates a lot of tension and difficulties, because some migrant workers have been with us for many, many years, and for a small business, they're part of the family. So there's a lot of tension that exists in that space. It doesn't remove the need for employers to totally test the marketplace, make genuine attempts to employ Kiwis who are trainable or are qualified to do that work. So we're totally aware that there will be some complexities as we go forward. One of the big messages that we're sending is that you might have had a vision to stay in New Zealand for a lengthy period of time, even make your rest of your life here. Some of that has been compromised by what we're experiencing. And we must remember this crisis is global, and New Zealand is experiencing this disruption through no fault of its own. We've inherited this from overseas. So it's changed the landscape. I use that term quite a bit. It certainly has changed everything. So it's got to be difficult for us to comprehend what the future may hold, particularly if I wanted to stay in New Zealand. My advice would be to have a long-term plan, to think longer than 6 months, and that if I do have to exit New Zealand because there's no work for me here and I'm struggling mentally and emotionally and I've got to get home to a place of safety, take my family back home, then that may be that outcome. It does not mean that the future can't be revisited when we're out of this situation and out of this pandemic and the economy has picked up somewhat. So I think we have to look long term and not just be worried about what the short term outcomes are going to mean for us, however much they pain us and we don't want them to happen. We're not doing any offshore visa processing, and maybe not surprisingly, we've had lots of applications from overseas still. People wanting to come and move to New Zealand, people wanting to apply for jobs in New Zealand, which just shows the allure to come to New Zealand, how much people want to get here. And once again, we've probably stamped ourselves on the globe by being as successful as we have in stamping out the COVID-19, or flattening the curve, as it were. But we must still protect our borders. So once again, they are not going to be opened up, without really due diligence as to not taking 4 steps forward and then 5 steps back through risking our health. So that's been the rationale for the government and the health sector, most definitely. So I'll finish with, you need to have a plan, and some of the questions and answers we have today, they might be really a bitter pill to swallow, as we say, because some of those answers aren't going to be exactly what you would like. But I want us to approach it, I guess, with a sense of what do I do? What do I need to do to keep myself secure, keep food on the table, and what do I have to do about my planning? So thank you, Janice. Bevan.
Thank you, Tony. And there will be some questions here that you've probably covered the answers for already.
It's okay.
Just to make sure that we get it, I will probably ask them again. I will also say to those watching, there are some questions here that are actually quite personal to particular people. So unless I can pose those to a situation where they're general, we will just have to leave them sitting there today, because we don't want to have personal people's names mentioned as we wander on through. So with that said, we'll get started with some of the questions that have come in earlier. And this one is for a person who has a person hired with working holiday visa, but that allows them to work for 3 months for an employer. His working holiday visa was extended to the 25th of September 2020. Would he be allowed to work for longer than that 3 months for us under his new visa extension?
Thanks, Bevan. With a working holiday visa, under normal circumstances, it means that you work around and you have a holiday, just like New Zealanders going for their big OE. the reality being is that that 3 months has not changed. And so whilst I can get a sense that, well, this makes sense that someone could work longer, they haven't moved that criteria. So 3 months is the longest you can work for one employer on a working holiday visa. Do remember that on that working holiday visa, you can find work anywhere else. That's the conditions of that visa. So you can start with a new employer. But at the moment, we don't want to extend that length of time because I'll use the term, we don't want to send the wrong signal about this is going to be a permanent thing, because it's very much definitely working holiday. And once again, we've got to compete in the Kiwi job marketplace as well.
Okay, thank you. Another an interesting one here, and I think you answered it because the border's closed, but a farmer has two Filipino workers on a 3-year visa and has only been here for 1 year, but went home for a holiday, and now he's stuck in the Philippines. Are we likely to see him back in the near future? I think you answered that, but
yeah. Thanks, Bevan. I think, and you're absolutely right. It's not going to be probably an immigration decision. It'll be a governmental and health decision and MFAT for the people involved in that decision making. However, how I will elaborate on that is that we've seen people who have got residency to come to New Zealand who haven't arrived in New Zealand. They've got a due date to be arriving by. So we've got to create policy that reflects the fact that someone is wanting to come to New Zealand but hasn't made that first visit. So therefore, their visa becomes null and void. We have to make policy about how we're going to address that issue. If I take it a step further and look at a work visa, one example that came up this morning was my worker's overseas and his visa expires on the 20th of July. Now, if he doesn't get here by the 20th of July, what's the situation? So there's a couple of things there. Is that one, is the border open for him to come in and take up that situation? Do we have to reapply for a new visa? Yes, more than likely. And once again, because the job market has changed, will there be a job here for him? So there's a lot of complexities in relation to when your visa is going to expire. So there could be people offshore who want to get back, but as the weeks go on, we just don't know what the labour force, what the environment economically is going to look like. So there's still a lot of doubt as to the viability of jobs, not to be scaremongering at all, but it's very important that we work out. We don't want people coming into New Zealand who suddenly lose their jobs. Yeah, there's got to be that viability still.
Okay, this one runs on to a worker who is here in New Zealand. They're going to renew their sponsored work visa, and they realise that's going to become a little bit harder. But if they are here and they apply and they get declined, but they can't go home, and the business is prepared to keep them on, can they continue to stay working for the employer they were working for?
The simple answer to that is no. You have to have a valid visa to continue working in New Zealand. So what we often do if someone has a trouble securing employment, we'll give them scope to try and find another job. If they can't, we may transition them onto a visitor visa or an interim visa, or their visa will run out eventually. And under normal situations, they would then have to exit New Zealand. Right, we now have the complexity of COVID-19, the lack of travel. Nonetheless, we still can't give them a work visa if there's no job available to them. So if I go back to that community response, the governmental response on a humanitarian level, so whilst at this stage, temporary migrants who are not residents cannot obtain a job seeker support benefit, we've got civil defence, we've got consulate and embassy support, and we encourage people who have realised that there's no work for me, it is time that I went home, is to seek consular or embassy information on what repatriation flights may be available or coming up. Make no mistake, we're completely aware that that's not a fantastic answer if you're suddenly thinking, how am I going to pay my rent, or how am I going to survive in this situation? And there is no simple answer to that. And that's why, as I say, Civil Defence has a $30 million top-up in relation to support being available to all members of our community, irrespective of your visa status. It's not a fantastic synopsis, it's not a fantastic story to tell, but at the moment, we have to work out where we can put our supports in relation for migrant workers. And if I break it down to a non-COVID environment once again, if the economy had changed dramatically and with people lost jobs at an alarming rate, we would say, thank you so much for coming into New Zealand. Thank you for the work you've done. And that's not to sound condescending, but now it's time to actually find a job overseas or go back home because we don't have any jobs anymore. When we overlay that with the complexity of COVID-19, we have travel issues. So that has absolutely magnified the problem with not 100% solution. Yeah.
Okay, and I think we're starting to go a little bit in circles, but I'll just ask this one. If we close our business temporarily, can our employees, whom we sponsored their work visas, go work for another company in a different role and pay rate, or do they have to apply for a change in their visa?
They will have to apply for a change in their visa. So the scope is there to do it, definitely.
Right. What is the situation for a migrant who's waiting for renewal of work visas to proceed and is being offered jobs right now? They've got family obviously to support and finances are a bit tight. I think their question is how long is it going to take to get these new work visas renewed?
If they made an application prior to lockdown, their visa application, if it was online, will be in our system, and they will be addressing that probably as we speak. If I'm thinking about timeframes, if you should be able to go online and check where your visa's at, if it's an online application, and work out, well, where am I sitting in the scheme of things? If there's another job offer on the table, then they could investigate relinquishing that original application and applying for a new application if there's a more attractive proposition in the marketplace for them. So there's nothing to stop them. I'll make a good point there, Ben. That was a really good question, is that there's nothing changed in relation to applying for a job in New Zealand. The process is still the same because we've always had to see if there's a Kiwi available. But last year, in certain areas in New Zealand, there was never a Kiwi available because unemployment was so low. That option is still available for everyone applying for jobs, migrants and employers. The only complication now is that the labour market has changed and there may be more Kiwis available that you would have to say why they were not worthy of have been employed, couldn't do the job or for whatever reason. So that's the only probably complication or change, the squeeze in the labour market. But people can still apply for jobs.
Okay, there's one here. I've applied for residency in July last year. Obviously, they haven't got it yet. Will there be a different or a change of criteria once Immigration New Zealand gets back to processing the residential visas?
Okay, so residential visas, there's probably going to be a delay on residential visas, and we're only processing those that are onshore. And we're prioritising residency visas from high end. So if you're on $106,000 per year and you're in a job that requires a registration, like electrician, jobs like that, and then it goes down to the next tranche of South Island visa, contribution visa, which are very, very important. So the visas, we're processing high-end visas, so there's going to be a delay in your point system visa. The other residency visas that exist, there will be a delay. I think the other risk factor for migrant workers, and this is a very, and I totally aware when I say this that it's a pain situation, is if I've been working for an accredited employer, or I'm on a pathway to residency because of my status of my job, it's predicated on having that job. So there are people I have heard who, of course, have had their employment disrupted under normal circumstances. They could apply to go to another accredited employer. Once again, the pinch point is, can I secure that employment? And so, people who have wanted to live their life here, it may be interrupted at this stage. So that is, that's a real pain point for people, and we get that.
Okay, and I've got quite a few questions around this, and you alluded to it before, so I'll ask it, and then I will hopefully miss it as I work my way down the great list.
It's okay. It's okay.
In August, some migrants will have completed their maximum 3 years in New Zealand on an essential visa. Is immigration looking at extending these restrictions until the border opens?
At this stage, no. The 1+1+1, then exit New Zealand for 12 months will stay in force. The only difference will be if new policy in relation to the length of visa is your hourly rate, so over $25.50, the medium wage. So if you're paying over that, you can secure employment for a longer period of time. So there's a slight variation in relation to that coming in, which is due in June, the changes. So people who probably have been to our seminars before will know that ANSCO 4 and 5 are taking a back seat, and it's going to be how much you pay me will dictate the length of visa that I have. So there's still opportunity. If I'm on my last year of visa, but I'm on a job that's paying me $26.50 per hour, that will dictate that I can actually get an extension on my visa as long as I meet all the requirements still. So yes, the 12-month stand down is still in vogue. The only area we made slight adjustment was at the level 4 was allowing health workers to postpone that 12 months because we know healthcare is vitally important. So they can do that.
What happens with long-term partners of New Zealand citizens who are on essential skills visas expiring in July?
If you're on an essential skills visa, you're going to probably have to transition to a partnership visa under work. So it's not applying for residency under partnership, it's actually applying for a visa under partnership to work, which gives you an open visa. So it would be there will be situations where people have just stayed on an essential skills visa, and they may be with married or partners of New Zealand citizens, but if they are now going to have to prove that relationship to us and apply for a partnership visa, would be just based on that rudimentary question without knowing all the details and all the ins and outs, that'd be one option for them going forward.
Okay, for those that may be on visas, does the working visa 3-month condition start when the worker starts with a new employer or from the time they arrived in the country?
Sorry, is that just repeat that question, Bevan?
Does the working visa 3-month condition start when the worker starts with a new employer?
If it's an unusual question, and the 3 months is leading me to think that it's a working holiday visa, because there's very limited visas that we do for 3 months, normally in viticulture or horticulture. Most visas are 12 months long for an essential skill. So I'm going to base this on a working holiday visa. So if I came to New Zealand on holiday from the UK and I started working on a dairy farm, I could work there for 3 months as a farm labourer. I would then be expected to move on to another employer, and I could stay, have a bit of fun, then go on and do some more employment for 3 months with a different employer. They can always ask again if I haven't quite got that right.
Okay. Yeah, I was a little bit confused as well,
Yeah.
so I decided just to read it the way it was. Will the South Island work visa be on again?
At this stage, no. It was a one-off bespoke visa that certainly it addressed the issue of people being here for a long time, Bevan, on a 1+1+1+1+1+1 with no pathway to residency. So we certainly recognised that was untenable, wasn't a great settlement equation. We had people having children here who had no pathway to residency. So and it was predominantly a South Island issue. So we formulated that as a bespoke one-off solution. And so, yeah, that's still in vogue. It's still active, but only in the process of getting residency. And as I say, at this stage, there's no further talk. And that is why we then had the 3-year maximum, then a stand down of 12 months. So we renegotiated the entry into New Zealand. So that's something I think is an important question, in the fact that since the policy changed in 2017, 18, whichever it was, that was about resetting the expectations that the longest you could stay in New Zealand on that job level was 3 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I think that moves into the next question, which is what is happening with the work to resident South Island contribution applications? Will they proceed or are they on?
But they're still proceeding, but they're a time-based visa.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're quite intricate in themselves, but they're still there. They're still listed. So that's a good thing. Yep.
Can you clarify whether work visa holders who are offshore, in other words, we were talking about that before, the worker that was on holiday when lockdown started, will have had their visas rolled over to the 25th of September 25th as work visa holders onshore have. So will they get, if they're offshore, will they get the rollover as well?
They haven't at this stage.
Okay.
So we're viewing that with a view to go, I'll go back to that some questions ago, we can revisit this to make sure the job's still available before we make a decision.
Okay. And because of the situation where people are finishing their visas, etc., and maybe not being able to get home, I think this is quite a valid question. How will the workers support themselves if their visa ends and they can't return home?
Yep, and that's a difficult scenario, and I have to go back to the situation of tapping into community support, consulate, embassy support, civil defence support. So the message I think there is that have a plan for what am I going to do to get home. I have to be in charge of my own destiny, so I need to connect with my embassy, my consulate, because we know at the moment that the border will more than likely open up for exiting New Zealand.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes sense. So that's going to be probably the first thing that happens for people to go, look, you need to get home now. And look, I know there's lots of migrant workers who have finished up in employment and just really want to get home. And so they're waiting for their borders to open to get there. So as to that support, I know it's cold comfort. I know it's not cold, hard cash for people, but it's about tapping into whatever support mechanisms exist in your community, including mainly civil defence.
This is something you would certainly know about, and I have no idea. So there are many jobless migrants who need a new work visa to find a new job. What is the processing time currently for the work visa change, and how would the new immigration bill help?
Okay, so really good question, that one. Thank you very much. So I'll break that down into a couple of parts. So whilst we've got the offices back to about 80% capacity onshore in New Zealand, we've got a group working in the dairy sector, because we know we've got June coming up, which is a big date on the New Zealand dairy scene. So we're we've got a specialist team set up to work with those types of visas, because farmers are transitioning, share milkers are transitioning onto different farms, herds are moving. So we're working in that space. Well, I'd love to tell you that I can tell you that a visa is going to take a month or 6 weeks or what it might be. At the moment, all we can say is we're back in the office as of a week and a bit. We're still trying to get a sense of what our backlog is like and how long this is going to take. One thing I will say is we do use a term called decision-ready visa, and that's when you have every box ticked. So the migrant worker's got all the parts of the equation. The employer has got all parts of the equation. So when it lands in immigration's desk, the immigration officer can go, brilliant. This is absolutely perfect. Everything's been ticked. Advertising's been done. It meets every requirement. I can approve this. And that's what we call a decision-ready visa. So my advice is don't rush it. Get it right, because otherwise that will cause a further delay to what already could be a difficult time. However, from speaking with some of my colleagues, they've actually been pleased with their progress so far to get rid of a backlog, prioritise what needs to be done. And so, as I say, once again, you can still apply for a work visa and we'll still process it as long as you follow all the requirements.
Okay, thank you. Now, I think some of these questions are starting to look very, very much the same.
Yep, that's okay.
Yeah, but how long, what's happening with residency applications? Are they being assessed? And I think you said they are, because you just talked about, as long as all the boxes are ticked. and are they being assessed whether the applicants are essential services or not?
So, yep, so residency visas to an extent are being processed. So if I just go back to a couple of questions earlier, if you are, and I'll make no bones about this. So at the moment, we're doing high-end residency applications. That's the reality. So that's going to be salary-based, qualification-based, and partners of domestic violence. So we have situations in that. So there's some visas that sit on a higher tier to be processed. It would be completely true to say that if you're waiting for your residency to be processed and it hasn't been assigned to an immigration officer, that will be now a lengthy process. And so we were probably talking 10 months anyway, so that could be pushed out further. And that's the reality of our situation at the moment.
Okay. How long does it take to change the scope of a visa at the moment, Tony?
Scope of visa? Okay, then. That's probably, look, a variation on conditions, which I think is probably what they mean. Or, so therefore, if I want to move to another employer in my same region, things like that, they can be pushed through, but it may be the same timeframes at the moment. Yeah, because most visas are processed on date order that they're received, unless we have a mandate to be able to focus attention on those ones I mentioned earlier.
Okay, are people's second working holiday visas being processed still?
If they're onshore, okay, then if you're onshore, most what would be the way to describe this? So if my working holiday visa was expiring by the 9th of July, then I've been rolled out to September. If my working holiday visa expires in the end of July, August, then you could make application to get an extension depending on what country you're from. It's very hard to answer that with any sort of clarity because of the different countries. We have different arrangements for the length of time you can have a visa in New Zealand. So, yeah, it's just throw that question at me again, Bevan, just so I get a better idea of it. Sorry.
I'd love to, but
it's gone. That's all right. Yeah, so it was.
Verity's managed to remove it from the.
That's okay. Look, no, I think it's so working holiday visas, that sort of thing. Yeah. There's some real complexity around that.
So second holiday, that's what it was.
Yeah, the second part of it. So if you're here, you can certainly apply. If you're offshore, no, you can't apply. So yeah. Thanks for that, Bevan. They're running together a little bit.
Yeah, they are. They get a little bit like this, but we do understand people.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Out there, so we're working through them one at a time. So, if the migrant's current visa is an essential skills visa that has been sponsored by a labour hire company, and he wants to transfer to a new employer, is the new employer required to assume the sponsorship?
Yeah, so if I was working for a labour and hire company and I went, well, I actually want to go and work for another firm, another company, I want to work for Tony McNeil Construction, then you would make a visa application to work with me and I would support that in the usual way. So once again, I go back to the fact that certain rules, policies, protocols remain the same. And so therefore, if you were moving employers, you'd have a job offer, you'd have a contract, you'd be able to apply to go to a new employer. Once again, that still is a possibility, you still have that ability, but once again, there may be labour market checks that make it a bit more difficult.
Okay, this one here, I've just had a read through it. It doesn't make any sense to me, but it may to you. We've employed someone that had their visa approved in January and a signed contract with us with a start date of April. What will happen with them now? I'm not sure whether that employer is onshore or not.
Yeah, if they're offshore, then once again, it's all dependent on the border. If they were onshore, that's a heck of a long, I'm thinking it must be offshore because that's a really long contract date, particularly if they were onshore and already had another employer. So that would be a very unusual, I'm moving my employer in 6 months. So I agree with you, Bevan, it could well be an offshore scenario.
Yeah. And so that depends entirely on our borders.
Correct.
Right. When is the expressions of interest in the skills migrant category again available?
So they're available at the moment, but only for those, as I mentioned earlier, only those high-end positions. So that's going to be double the median wage, which is $51 per hour, and any job that is linked to a certificate, as in that's required for registration under welfare and immigration instructions. So you'll know if you fit that category, Bevan. That is the reality of that one. Yep.
And I think that this one here, I'm going to ask it, but I'm not sure that you can answer it because it sounds quite specific. There's a family of 4 stranded overseas with a work visa. It expired during the lockdown. We have already applied for an extension, but don't have an answer yet. We applied for residency under South Island contribution last October. My employer is holding my position on the farm as an assistant manager. What will happen with our visa residency if we are not in New Zealand?
Cool, Bevan. I got the front end of that question about they're offshore, they've got a visa. What was the South Island visa one?
We have applied for residency under South Island contribution, and they applied for that last October. My employer is holding my position as a farm assistant manager. What will happen with our visa and residency if we are not in New Zealand?
Okay, so if this is linked to the South Island contribution visa, and I'm assuming that their application, because this actually, they would have applied for this well over 4 years ago, okay, because that's when the applications were made for the South Island visa. There was a 12-month window in time if you were eligible to apply for it. So I'd imagine that what you had to do is every 2 years you applied for another portion of that, which eventually led to residency. So they've applied for because you've got to have a job as well. So they've applied for their visa and they've made sure that we're aware of the South Island visa. They're stuck offshore. They fall into a very unique category. So I'd probably want an email via yourself or Janice to me from that particular employer, because we don't want, the South Island contribution visa is a very bespoke visa. So we would want to make sure that we have policy in and around that to support that family as best we can. So I'm not promising anything, but I would love to get an email about that particular case because that's something I want to follow up on at the very least, just to make sure that we keep a visibility of those particular ones, because the reality being is someone on the South Island visa has invested 9 years or more into New Zealand already. And that's the reality of the situation. Yeah.
Okay, let's just take a breath then, Tony. What is that? What is that email? Just as
yeah. So it's here's my dangerous ground. This is it's anthony.mcneil@mb.gov.nz.
Okay, thank you for that.
Yeah.
The work visa expires and visitor visa is applied for. How long will the visitor visa they get last?
So visitor visas can be from anywhere from 1 month to 3 months to 6 months, depending on the requirements. So the default one would normally be 3 months. But if something's got more difficult, then we could review it again. And this is a good point, because I just remembered another portion of a question was the amendment bill, how that works. So that amendment bill that I talked about a couple of weeks ago has come to pass. It's been to select committee. There were some changes made. So whilst this gives our minister the ability to make decisions based on exactly that, Bevan. So if there was 5,000 people on a special class of visa that actually needed to be extended or needed to have some modifications made, that amendment allows him to do it in a bulk lot. Prior to that, it was one by one. So, and we know we needed more flexibility to be able to respond to what was required. And once again, it's to do positive things, not negative things, which has been something that's been out there. So yeah, so the amendment bill allows our minister to make those decisions about, right, visitor visa, I've got to extend a trance of people who are under pressure and we want to keep them legally in New Zealand. Yeah.
Okay, so the next question is far too wide ranging, I think, to answer here. And I think the person should go online and just have a look, because it's what change of effect should we expect to see when the new immigration bill comes in, and when will that come in? Because still it's selected.
So So the amendment bill's is passed, so the minister has those powers, but he has no mandate to do anything with them as yet. So he always takes, any minister will work with his policy people, with Immigration New Zealand. So he will tap into what Immigration New Zealand is seeing, is feeling, is working out what's working, what's not. So he's not duty bound to use any one of those powers if he doesn't have to, but it's available to him to fix something that might be broken.
Okay. And I think this will be happening a little bit across some sectors. Is it possible to reduce the requirements for 30 hours guaranteed work for those on essential skills visa if the business is now only open for 3 days a week?
Yeah, that's a really good question too, and it's come up quite a bit, and I don't have a great answer for those who are in that situation. So obviously we've got things like, I've talked at length about community support. I've talked about the wage subsidy if in actual fact the shop's not open, the premises is not open. In relation to reducing hours, our policy people would see this as a band-aid. And so what it may do is just prolong a bad situation of people living below the poverty line anyway. And look, and I had a challenge this morning about, well, something's better than nothing. So I accept that challenge. I see it, I accept it. However, we don't want to put band-aids on situations that are not going to recover. And so changing policy like that may not be the best way forward. And obviously, the other way may not be the best way forward. And I talked quite lengthily this morning about the fact that we've all found ourselves in a very, very terrible situation, more so when I'm a temporary migrant in a country, just as if I was overseas and I suddenly found that, crikey, things are really difficult. I need to make some decisions about my future. And once again, the complication is I can't extract myself from this situation. I can't leave. So the reduced hours thing has not gained any traction with government at the moment.
Okay.
Because it breaches visas further. That's the problem. Yeah.
Now you have answered this, but it's kind of probably 20 minutes ago. So in case this person wasn't listening at the time or wasn't on board at the time, we'll just go back through it. We've been here for 7 years on essential work visa, and now we're on the 3rd year of essential work visa before the 1 year stand down. Please advise as we are settled here in the community. I think
that's a really tough scenario, because I'm imagining that they were not eligible for the South Island contribution visa due to the length of time they've been here, which is still a lengthy time, but it wouldn't have met the criteria just from what was described. I get that you're well settled here, but falling into that situation of the year stand down, that still will be applicable based on what you've told me. There's nothing that in that question that would allow me to say that will change. And whilst I know that's difficult, that was when they brought that policy in, the job that you were doing did not lend itself to a pathway to residency, unfortunately for you.
Okay, so you mentioned earlier that if the migrant was offshore, they can't apply. When is this law coming into effect? Now, I think what you said was, their borders closed, so there's no point of actually applying. I think
so we were still receiving applications, and we had to go, stop, we can't take any more. We're not going to process it. Please do not apply. But I know that we've had a lot of interest from people wanting to come to New Zealand and working out how they can get here. So it's a reflection of their desire to come here. So yeah, but at the moment we're not receiving any offshore work visas or residency visas or expressions of anything.
Well, that appears to me to be quite sensible with the border closed.
Absolutely. Yeah.
When are the selection of interest, or when are the selection of expressive interest for the SMC coming back?
As I said, we probably answered that before. They exist, but only in a certain criteria.
Yeah. I'm just making sure that we've got 2 here that look exactly the same. Yes, and I'll try and combine them together. Can we allow those on essential skill visas to work in a variety of positions, as it is now all hands on deck in the type of business that this person is employed in?
Okay, so under level 4, there was certain requirements where people could work in essential areas. Now, one of the confusing things is we use essential skills visa and essential, and to describe other things as well. So it can get quite confusing. So to remove that confusion, supermarkets, healthcare, you were able to move staff and around to a different employer, same industry, same region. So there was just, and that ended 6 weeks after level 2. There's still no capacity to move staff around your business unless there's not a substantive change in what's on their visa. Okay, so it's about applying a bit of common sense in relation to, well, I need to move my force from 10 metres that way to 15 metres that way, and their job hasn't changed to a huge degree. But it's just about applying common sense, because what we don't want is people to say, oh, the rules don't apply anymore. And that's a really, really big thing, is that, we know that people want to make flexible decisions. And at the moment, whilst there has been some change in flexibility or an ability to move staff, you can do it, that much, but don't push the boundaries so far that you're breaking and breaching visa. Because what we don't want is people making poor decisions and then finding themselves in 5 months' time, we realise, wow, you really broke the rules. We were quite happy to allow you, we were aware of your situation, but you chose to break the rules further. And we don't want that if we can help it.
So there's a contract milker here who's about to move to a new farm, and he has a worker with a valid visa till the end of September, and they need to apply for a new visa to work with him in the new place. Okay, is that?
Yep.
happening?
I think that, yes, absolutely. As I said, we've got the team working in the dairy space. So if they haven't done it already, I would definitely put that application through. If it could just be a variation of conditions, just depending on their circumstances. But obviously seeking legal advice or advice from an immigration advisor is always, probably maybe even more in this space, it's a very important thing to do, because there's so much complexity about your decision making. And so definitely it's always about someone. And when I talk about these things, it's about the options that are available. And so people ultimately have to make that choice for themselves as well. And seeking legal advice, immigration advice is probably essential. But yeah, look, at the moment, if there's a opportunity for them to move farms, just apply the normal process if it was 2019. And try, and as much as you can, forget about the peripheral stuff that's going on. And then if we've got any complications with it, we'll ask you. Okay. So I think don't try and overthink it. Just do what you would normally do.
Right. When is the Pacific Access category open? Again, I think that's the...
Yeah, we don't know. So Pacific Access category, Samoan quota, parent category, they're postponed at the moment. So the word is postponed until we have a better sense of it. And it must be remembered that, Samoa, the Pacific Islands, their borders are closed with really good reason, because, it'd be a catastrophic event if we, didn't look at, if we sent people back home or allowed people to go back home, it could be a catastrophic outcome for the islands.
Yeah. And I know I'm sure you've answered this, but they're starting to mould a little bit with me. When will the skilled migrant category resident visa be reopened for expression of interest?
Yeah. That's just, at the moment it's open, but only for a certain class of employment. Yeah.
Right, there's quite a long one here, and I haven't had a chance to pre-read it, so here goes. My client went offshore to attend a wedding right before the lockdown and was not allowed to re-enter since. He holds a work to resident accredited employer work visa, and his life is here, rental car, contents, etc. His employer desperately wants him back as he's a specialist mechanic, and they are waiting for his return to keep their company viable. We have applied for an exemption to travel, but to no avail. Is there a higher party to contact about this?
Yeah. Okay. Look, and I think that obviously, and I just picked that beginning. So he's the partner, but he's not it. He's viable because of his partner. He's got a work visa, but he's not a citizen of New Zealand.
Yeah, he holds a work to residence accredited.
Right. So he's on that pathway. Yep. So And so he was offshore at the time of lockdown. So he's stuck offshore. Yeah, it's about waiting for that border to change in relation to getting them back.
No way around it.
So I'll just take you through. Yep, look, we've had when level 4 came online, New Zealanders could come back, citizens, permanent residents, husbands, wives, partners, children, parents you travelled together and you were part, and you had that family unity, and you lived in New Zealand normally under normal events. So yes, New Zealanders could come back no matter where they were born, as long as they had residency and upwards. So we had a lot of situations where we had partners of New Zealand residents who couldn't get back, who were caught offshore because they weren't New Zealanders, they weren't travelling with their partner, there was no way they could get back in. So we've had a situation where on humanitarian grounds you could apply, and I use essential jobs that were linked to COVID-19, normally in the health sector. So, but if you needed, if we had to bring a specialist engineer in to one of the hospitals to do a computer program linked to COVID-19, that's an example. I'm not saying that happened, but that would be an example of where we would go, okay then, yep, we will make an exception as long as you obey quarantine rules and at that time, and we will allow that to happen. So on the humanitarian front, we have had probably 20% approval rate of people who have come back for complete and utter humanitarian reasons with an extremely high threshold. So whilst I can totally understand how this young lady is feeling, and the job is there, it's unfortunately there's a lot of people caught offshore, and once again we have to think short term that it won't be forever. And as long as that job's still open and they can get back into New Zealand once the border is open, then things will resume to some sort of normality for her and him. But at the moment, it's probably a very difficult scenario. Look, they've got every right to apply online. They can apply online, and they may already have done that. But that would be the highest authority that you're going to probably be able to apply to. Yep. But my commiserations, I understand.
Yeah. My husband is an essential skill as a farm operations manager. He's to 2 farms. They have 2 New Zealand-born children, and the person is a New Zealand-born citizen. One of the partners is a New Zealand-born citizen. He's applied for another essential skills while we get our partnership residency application together. He is onshore. Is he likely to get a new essential skills visa? Now, I think that's a longer conversation than we can do here.
Oh, look, all I can tell you is that go and apply under the normal protocols, and there's not going to be farmers materialising off the streets who are suddenly capable of doing farm work. So I think we shouldn't panic in certain sectors, but that's my personal take on it. So I think approach it as you normally would. Make sure the job offer's there, make sure everything's done, the visas are filled out correctly, because a correct visa means speed of processing. So there's nothing to say that this person will not be able to get another essential skills visa, and hopefully your partnership visa comes to fruition. But yeah, look, I can't say yes or no. All I can say is you're able to apply.
Right. Another long one here, and then we've got one last one after that, which I think will close off the session really nicely. I've applied for a South Island contribution visa in February, and I have to apply for a new work visa. Can the same medical be used for the new application?
Normally, you can probably look this up, but I think it has to be within 3 months. It has to be older than 3 months.
And there's an extra piece on the end of this that says, I can't get the police records from my country because they are still in quarantine. Can we still apply without it?
What I would do is keep on trying would be our best option, but you can apply, but tell us a story as to why you cannot achieve that result. So if you tell us we can't do this because there's no connectivity to my home country because of COVID-19 and their lockdown status, so we'll judge that on its merits.
Yeah, and the other part of that question you've already answered is there any change for those that have already applied for the South Island contribution?
they're still sitting there as a viable option. Yep.
Yeah. Okay, and it's been a very informative hour. That I will just finish with one. I think here, will INZ be processing student visas at the moment so that they've got a valid visa when the New Zealand border opens? And I think that's trying to look into a crystal ball.
Well, it's interestingly enough, I was on a meeting on Monday about this very thing. So students who are onshore, we're looking after them. Their visas are valid. We're processing the visas internally to make sure they stay legally in New Zealand. So as you can imagine, institutions, tertiary institutions, private polytechs are very keen to get international students back. So as soon as there is tertiary educations and polytechs have an offering, they have ability to provide quarantine facilities. They have an offering and a program that's acceptable. Immigration's happy with it. So I think once all parts of the mechanism come together, then yes, we can revisit international student study. Yeah. But it's not just an immigration decision.
And I just see a couple have come in, but they're all around the South Island residential thing. So it's really a matter of contacting you guys.
Yep.
I'm working their way through it.
Yeah, it's a time-based visa application, so we want to keep, those people close to us because it is a bespoke one-off visa so we want to make sure how they're getting on. Yep.
Okay, and we've got a number of people coming in and thanking us for how much guidance we've given in this. So
cool.
It's been a pretty full-on hour, and
yep.
I know, Tony, this is not the first one of these that you've done today. So thank you for answering all those questions in such a fabulous way. But I think it all comes back to, if in doubt, contact Immigration New Zealand.
Absolutely.
Yes, they can.
Yeah. Don't be afraid of us. I know we're a government department, and sometimes people think, oh, I'm not going to contact the government, but we'd rather be aware of what the problems are, and that way we can facilitate at least an option or a way forward. And we know your predicament. Yep.
That's grand. Janice.
Oh, thanks so much, Tony and Bevan, for your time and sharing your knowledge and information in this webinar for the Ashburton District. Thanks also to those of you who tuned in and for putting forward your questions. I think there were 35, 36, 30, about 38 questions in total that we covered. For those of you that still have unanswered questions, in a day's time we will send you a survey link, and in that email will be key phone numbers and websites from today. Also will be a link to our Ashburton District Council webinar series, so you can watch this webinar and others from the series on demand, and hopefully they will answer some questions for you that maybe you missed. But otherwise, thanks again to everyone, and stay safe out there, and we'll see you another time.
Very much.